Okay, well, we'll see who else shows up besides Stacey today.
I'm going to make you co-host, Barry, because I'm getting very, very sleepy.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Oh, here comes Joshua. So there's going to at least be three of us in live attendance, wake attendance.
So I don't see Stacey anymore.
She went to walk or not walk the dog, but attended.
No. Can you hear me from here?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I do.
I'm just taking care of the dog, and I'll even give up my coffee for a while because I did come here wanting to talk. So let me just finish his medicine. I'll be there in a second.
I'll stay awake as long as I can.
Okay. Yeah, I fell back asleep after I texted you, so I was happy to get a few more hours sleep. All right. Coffee can wait.
By the way, I'm going to leave the audio on like this. Can you guys hear a lot of background music?
I don't hear any.
Not at the moment. A minute ago, I thought there were two machines, kind of feeding back a little to each other, but then it vanished. But I don't know if that was you or Joshua, because I know that you had two machines going there.
Yeah, that was me.
That was you. Okay.
Anyway, this hotel appears to be quite popular for parties, especially engagements and weddings. So like I've been here 2 weeks and there's already been about 4 or 5 of these things. They go on until like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning.
So you didn't crash? You didn't crash any?
I haven't thought about doing any of that because, oh man, I can't tell you how busy I am these days. Yeah, literally when I'm here, my calls occasionally start at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And half the time they quote unquote end at about 1 a.m. because there's always calls, in the North America time zones. And then of course there's a full day here. So it's really been a kind of a killer schedule. So
You're in India?
yes.
Where about?
In Pune, in Maharashtra.
Are you going to see any of the people that you've met in the online spaces?
Well, let's see. I hadn't planned on it because I didn't know how busy I was going to be. And this week on Thursday, well, the story is, it's been about 2 weeks since I've been here, and I'm going to be here another 2 weeks. I'm spending just the entire month of February here. And so I had to arrange dog care, cat care, duck sit care, home care, So my girlfriend, Gail, decided to do that. She's been doing that for every single trip I've been taking since June or May of last year. But she also wanted to come here. So about the last 10 days of my trip, I arranged for her to come and visit. So she'll be arriving on Thursday. And so maybe next weekend we're going to go someplace if I can find a good place to go. Not that I can't find a good place to go. Not that I meant I can arrange a good place to go.
Right.
So anyway, that's something we're going to consider.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I came here with a topic. Not a topic for the whole call, but just something that fits into the many things we talk about. There was something on Facebook that was posted. It was a copy and paste. And it was about dementia. And it was one of these things that, you know, if I get dementia, do this, do this, do this, do this. And
Mhm.
as I was reading it, to me, it looked like a list of agreements, you know, between two people. Which, by the way, when I was just walking to my dog, I was talking to my friend who works with dementia patients. And, you know, we talked about all the other nuances and she totally agreed. So not only was this about agreements, which there was one on there that I would not ask for. I would not say to you, if I get dementia, do this. And I think that the agreement that I might ask for, should something happen to me, is not the same as somebody else might ask for. Even though all the other things were very reasonable guidelines, to just do something in a copy and paste and jump on it, and that's the way to do it, is something that infuriates me, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about the lack of complexity, you know, the ability to break apart complexity. We're talking the lack of nuance, the inability to bring polar opposites together, and all of these things tie in. So again, I don't even know which direction to go in this, because I'm interested in dementia. I'm interested in the way we look at a subject. I'm interested in agreements. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And one more thing. I know so many people in the online spaces that depending on which thing I was focused in, I would go to those particular people that I've already built up a trust in their level of expertise on the subject, a trust in the way I see them evaluating information, and that should be my choice, not somebody else's. So I also decided that, you know, I've been hard on tech for the past few years. Now I want to start criticizing the people in the media and the people that create the content, because I've been also watching a lot of things that are streaming, and it makes me angry. And with that, I'm complete for now.
So can I ask a question?
Of course.
What part of it infuriates you? I mean, I know you've been saying a bit about it, but I was
What part?
curious why the infuriation was the word.
Well, when you say it, what do you think I'm infuriated by?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That's what he's
I don't-
asking you. He doesn't know.
Okay, the it is people being given information that's not structured in a way that you could agree with one part at a time and dissect it in a way that you see the nuance. I'm infuriated in the way it's received, in that people take it as a whole package or reject it as a whole package. I'm infuriated in the way we as a culture create the conditions for that to happen. And then we point our fingers everywhere else and we're not changing it ourselves, which is what I'm attempting to do. So the infuriation is my own frustration.
So may I still continue asking questions?
Yes, you may. I like questions. It
I'm
shows
curious.
curiosity.
Yeah, I'm curious why you view that as an obligation.
Oh, that's my that's why I've spent these years here banging my head against the virtual wall. That's my personal, that's what motivates me. That's the piece of communication that I feel I can contribute to.
So is it not possible to see it as an attempt by one or, you know, a few people to try and get awareness on a topic on which it's impossible to get universal agreement?
Well, so I'm glad you bring that up, because that touches on something that I try to bring up, which has to do with power. So yes, I think a few people are deciding that they're going to try to do this thing and they're on a positive mission to do something. and they've decided that they're the ones that know what's best to put out there. And they really don't go to all the other sources. They've decided they know what's best for other people. So they're going to go ahead and they're going to do what they think is best. And that's probably closer to where my frustration comes in.
So would you feel that had they given an opportunity for you to participate and help craft that would actually be a better process?
Absolutely. And not only with that's in, yes, I also feel that way about the public. That's why when I'm on Facebook, I try to like listen to other people's opinions and, you know, and I measure whoever I'm talking to, even if I don't know them, I'm still measuring how tied are they to their opinions. You know, if they're so tied, I can't waste my time anymore. But I think the phenomena that we see on Facebook shows how much people want to be heard. And there are a lot of voices out there that do make a lot of sense. And for them to be just disregarded, it's sort of like, you know, little children should be seen and not heard. I have a problem with that. To me, that's part of the old power dynamics that I don't want brought into this new world that some of us are hoping to see. So yes.
So is it possible, and I know we can't prove one way or the other, but is it possible that whomever issued this might have already done so within a small group, that they actually did try to solicit feedback on it and craft something together? Would it be possible to think that, yeah, maybe they did that?
Yeah, it's possible, but it's still a certain group.
So, you know, one of the things that I did when I got one of these copy and paste things years ago is I edited it. I didn't just copy paste it verbatim. So I didn't feel any obligation to do it verbatim. Just FYI.
And that's wonderful. And I wish I do the same thing usually, and I wish everybody would do that. But the fact is they don't, they won't, and we can't expect that they're going to change. So I'd like to see some effort put into, so how can we do it a little different? Maybe it means breaking things down into snippets. Maybe instead of putting all of those together one at a time, or what I've always tried to do is create spaces where we could have these conversations and then pull out of it.
So I've been hogging all the question and answer for now. I'll back off, even though I do still have more questions for now. Over.
I think it's good that I think it's a good question and answer. I don't know what Josh or Barry think, but I think it's productive to ask those questions. I'm happy and I want to answer them.
Yeah,
I'm saying, sorry, go ahead, Barry.
I was just waiting for you to finish. So if you're not finished, I'll wait a little longer.
All right, just a couple more then, since Stacey.
Take your time, Sam. Yeah, take your time.
One is, I still am curious about the notion of obligation, that you feel that something's demanded of you when
whoa. You're saying that this is not,
because you feel it.
it's my passion. This is my passion. Sure. It's not an obligation. This is me. This is what I like. This is what I'm motivated by.
You don't sound like you like it though. You sound irritated. You sound infuriated. You
Sam,
don't sound
I
like
can't,
you like what's
Sam, I'm not going to, I can't apologize for how it sounds to you. I'm telling you. Josh?
Clarifying question. Does it say on the thing, you must copy and paste? You must copy exactly.
No. Look, I have a problem with all these copy and paste. I think they add to.
I'm asking in the post itself, does it say copy and paste or is it just implied?
No, it says copy and paste.
Right, okay. That's what I was asking. Thanks for the clarifying.
Yeah.
It's a prompt that the poster wants others to replicate it verbatim. Okay. I didn't get that before.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, and that's always a problem, but I always say to my friends, I don't copy and paste, and I'll, then go on to talk about it. I think that's the laziest thing you can do. And I like having copy and paste because it's hard to keep doing the work over and over and over. I would like to see it be easier for people to modify what's there.
Copy and twiddle.
Josh?
I'm wondering if there was ever a discussion with your group of friends or with anyone on ways to share, different ways, RSS feeds, the share buttons, sharing.com, all the different ways to spread the word, spread the message. If there was a conversation on how different communities like to share things.
Not really, because the discussions with the people that are focused on those discussions really are not interested in the needs of the people that can't. It's like different groups have different passions and different needs. And so that's why I go to so many different groups. But it's, been a challenge to find the right ones for the right conversations and to bring sort of like a place where they can mix together, which to me is in conversational spaces.
So if it said at the bottom of it, please take a couple weeks to understand, digest this information and write your own blog post articles on these several different sources that would actually share and author it from Stacey Druss and put that back out to the community, we'd much appreciate that. Would that feel better?
Oh, no, I don't
If it
look,
said it
I
that way?
don't look, I don't even care. I'm not bringing it up because I want anybody to change anything. It's motivating me.
Oh, I'm
To
bringing it up.
create-
Yeah, I'm saying that's how I would like to see it. Personally, I'm saying if it said that, would that resonate? Meaning if everybody took the time to author and publish in a way that was substantial so that it had their own name on it and it was coming from them and not just click here, share.
I don't know. That doesn't matter to me because again, I'm much more interested in conversation. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that, like I said, I already took one piece and this morning I had a conversation about it with somebody. And that's something that I'm going to reach out to some people that know more about it. Like I have a psychiatrist friend and I'm going to say, are you interested in having a conversation just about this one piece? And hopefully I can create a space where we have a conversation. Another time might be a conversation about the next thing. Another time might be, I just want to see lots of different conversations, but breaking, starting with the post. But that post, I could see 12 different conversations in that one post. And I think that would be more productive because then you get the people going to the right piece. Like we were always talking about the different parts of the elephant and, people, it's hard to collaborate because everybody has their own agenda and their own point. To me, this would be a way where people would self-organize in a better way, but not be locked in. It's not like you can't be in all 12 conversations, but the part you're passionate about or the part that you actually know about, you have a space to put it there. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Thank you.
Hand up. Makes perfect sense. Thank you, Stacey.
Thanks. Sam?
So on the post, the one that you saw, did you choose or not choose to even comment on the post where or which you agreed or disagreed with, or perhaps even look at where the post might have been issued originally?
No, because it wasn't, honestly, I was just, it was late at night. I was in a different kind of mood and the person that posted is, somebody I know, they didn't mean anything by it. For me to post on it, it would have made me look like I'm just being picayune and I didn't want to do that. What I really wanted to do is, bring the post and say, well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit how the conversation with my friend went. We talked about how there are different kinds of dementia and you may not react the same way in each case. We talked about at what point is it diagnosed? Sometimes it's misdiagnosed. We talk about how do we even, again, I was thinking about the COVID conversation and how at different points you had different experts saying different things, and even sometimes experts don't know, or how sometimes people think that because they're in a certain field that makes them an expert, even though they're, like somebody could say, well, as a doctor, well, but you're not a specialist in dementia. Or again, people have different preferences. So for example, if I'm going to make a pact with my friends and I'm going to say to them, if I get dementia, I want you to do A, B, and C. My A, B, and C might be different than somebody else's. So the one piece said, go along with whatever the person says. I might ask for a different protocol. I just want to have that discussion. And I know Barry wants to talk, so I think I answered all the questions. And this is just an example. It's not just about dementia, but it could be an interesting topic for people just interested in dementia. Barry?
Before I begin, did you read what I put in the chat yet?
No, I'm sorry. Let me look.
Notice how many of the words in the chat you had just included in the last remarks that you said.
Guidelines called none.
That's not true.
Guidelines, cultural practice. So guidelines, cultural practices, customs, rules, conventional schools of thought, protocols, I use that one,
Aha.
agile rules, and negotiable protocols and social contracts. I meant all those. I may not have used those words, but yes, that's what I'm speaking to. That's why I brought this topic here.
Yeah. So now moving from the specific example and kind of going up one meta level to the phenomenon, the process in general, as people encounter situations where they need a methodology for dealing with it, a guidance. This is why I use the word guidelines or guidance. Before people learn to think things through in a deep, powerful way, they will turn to authority figures who have already thought it through, because it takes forever, it takes a lifetime to think these things through. So sometimes the very first thing they come to is the very first school of thought that they discover and read about. And for a lot of people, that's where they stop. They find some authority who's sort of written about this, and that becomes the cultural model for that clique, that demographic. And they don't realize that it's not the only one out there. So early on in a life journey, you'll find people, I discovered this wonderful set of guidelines that came from Rudolf Steiner or whoever. Okay, and that becomes their religion. They'd simply adopt it because they don't know there's any alternative. And so you have cultural practices and customs that you grew up with, and that's really all you were exposed to, and you embodied and adapted them, and you expect everybody else should be in line with this set of customs, otherwise you're going to have clashing. And then at some point, people realize, well, you can encode all of these guidelines and practices and customs in a formal set of rules, do's and don'ts. And this is sort of the kindergarten level of capturing this whole set of practices that we should all adhere to. So that's what I call conventional schools of thought. And a lot of people never really get beyond that level, which is essentially a grammar school level. Okay. Now, if you look at people who play with rules, especially people who work in the law, they talk about agile rules that are flexible. They don't have a hard and fast, lawful and unlawful. They have a little bit of bendability. And so people begin to talk about agile rules. And they'll use the term agile rules because the word protocol isn't in their vocabulary yet, even though internet protocol has been in the public domain for 30, 40, 50 years. People don't really think in terms of protocols, even though a lot of our practices are in fact protocols. They're just often not explained as examples of protocols. So negotiable protocols are really the power protocols. A negotiable protocol is sort of a mating dance, handshake that's not just a fixed interaction. It has some negotiation in it, and negotiation is partly because some people are more sophisticated and more agile, and other people simply say, "Give me the recipe and I'll follow it," because I'm not able to tweak the recipe. I don't know enough chemistry or food science to feel comfortable tweaking them. So I'll just stick this recipe. I know it works, and don't expect me to go beyond it. If you look in the history of how people develop these cultural guidelines or practices, beyond rules, which is how almost everybody sort of learns it, there's this thing called a social contract. And there were some philosophers who began writing about social contracts, I think maybe 300-400 years ago. I don't know if off the top of my head I can cite them now. Thomas Hobbes, and I'm sort of forgetting the names of, there's a list of famous philosophers who said, let's evolve beyond this rigid rules that are written in stone and evolve to negotiated current social contracts, just in our little local group. That's a very powerful advance. And when I began organizing online online learning communities on the internet back in the 90s, the last thing I wanted to do was to be the policeman who laid down the law and had to enforce it. And so I invited the participants to, from ab initio, from the get-go, please negotiate your social contract for this learning community among yourselves. And that is a set of agreements. They would all agree to abide by the mutually agreeable terms of engagement. And so I was relieved of the obligation to be the lawgiver and the policeman and the law enforcer and have to do the crime and punishment mishugas, which I absolutely do not want to support or encourage, or I wanted people to have the freedom and the challenge of crafting their own social contract. Now, it turns out that almost all the social networks that I'm in, where I was not the founder, don't have social contracts. Basically, the guy who started it is the guy who gets to make up the rules as they go along and kick people out. And like Stacey, I don't want to. I don't have much choice. If you want to be in somebody else's world, you got to go to their house and play by their rules. But I don't get very far. I find it's not a very pleasurable or constructive experience, and it generates a lot of drama and a lot of song parodies and comic operas, which lampoon that kind of kindergarten model. So yeah, I very much endorse agile agreements, social contracts, protocols, and thinking at the next higher level, not just with regard to dementia. That's just one instance.
Right.
Okay. And it's useful to look at examples in our culture where we went from rituals, hard and fast rituals. You had to do the ritual exactly this way. And you say, why did they introduce this ritual? What's it for? Well, rituals were for, number one, remembering the lesson of historical events that were important historical events, so you don't forget the lesson. And number two, how to handle rare but statistically predictable events like the death of a close loved one. And so we have rituals for funerals and things, because most people, when they have a sudden loss, at least especially for the first time, they have no idea how to process it. And so the culture provides a ritual, which is a civil and nonviolent way to process the grief and the transition. So rituals, which are in some sense rigid, play a very powerful role, but then people learn to make them more flexible. Go ahead, Stacey.
I just want to interject here because I think it's important. I think there is a third reason for ritual, and I want to bring it up because it's something that we would need to carry. And that it creates a space where we're connecting with each other. There's a social component to that. And I don't want to lose that good part in throwing away rituals.
Exactly.
Somehow we need to keep that.
Yeah, this is what Gregory Basin called schismogenesis. The church was one source of rituals to get through the difficult passages of life. And if you disagree on the details of the ritual, you end up splitting the church into different denominations. And that disconnects the community. So there's this thing of wanting to have a community where we all are on the same page and dancing to the same music and not bumping into each other, versus having so many different genres that, you know, we only talk to our own little tribe and we don't, you know, we're distanced from the other tribe. So there's this difficulty of accommodating these two competing goals. And that's where thinking about certain amount of flexibility and adaptability and allowance for departures from the standard, the orthodox ritual. And I don't think our species has really come to grips with this dynamic. But nonetheless, from the point of view of cultural anthropology, scholars of cultural anthropology, that's what they look at. They look at how do these customs and guidelines emerge, and what happens between the rigid versions and the loosey-goosey ones where there really isn't any strong guidelines at all, and what could happen on either end of this spectrum. But nonetheless, you have to have protocols that are functional, as agile as they need to be, but not so agile that most of the people can't talk to anybody else because they haven't negotiated a protocol to communicate by. And this is, I think, in my perspective, a very, very powerful part of a lifelong journey of how to become a human being.
To Sam, everything that Barry said, that's why I'm passionate.
But you can't be so passionate as to beat people over the head if they don't agree with you.
No, but I get this one block at time, so it's all coming out.
Who started to speak? I didn't catch.
I think Sam wanted to speak.
Sam, okay, because I can't see his mouth moving.
Well, Barry, I'm kind of responding to your points you make about rules versus the other points you make about these social contracts.
Right.
Because you could say that they're pretty much the same thing. And in my opinion, they pretty much are.
In your opinion, they are the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, like 99%. The
Well, they have a
1% that you allow for in the social contract that you don't allow for in the rules that you first rant against is this small bit of flexibility.
And one other thing, which is important, how you handle departure. What is the process for handling departures from the rules? Is it the crime and punishment model, judging somebody to have transgressed and then you have to give them some kind of a negative treatment? Or is it a more of an educational and adaptive, nonviolent adaptive approach? And I think that's a huge difference between hard and fast rules and this ability to accommodate the lifelong learning curve of human beings.
Yeah, that could be. But when you associate that sort of punitive consequence to rules and not to the social contract, to me, that's quite a strong, and I'll use the word assumption, which doesn't need to be there. So in my view, the point about agreements has to do a lot with these notions of how you agree, how you modify, how you deal with consequences, all of that is still bound up, whether or not you use the word rule, or whether or not you use the word social contract, or whether or not you use the word agile principle. All of those could be elaborated, and then all of those assumptions, clarified, even dismissed. So I do think that there's a number of assumptions built into the use of these words. And I've heard this now for many months, if not years. And I've always wanted to have this conversation. And so I thank Stacey for bringing it up. I think that there's an unnecessary set of assumptions built around those words. Over.
Yeah, the assumption is really a mathematical distinction. When you're driving down the highway, you have lane lines left and right of your car, and you try to stay away from crossing the lane lines. If you go to an airport, you'll see not lane lines on the runway, but a guideline right down the middle. And the pilot tries to stay on top of the guideline, whereas a driver in a car is trying to stay away from the boundary lines. The mathematics of staying away from the boundary versus staying on top of the guideline is a huge difference in calculus. It's a huge difference. And the notion of trying to minimize the departure from a guideline down the middle versus trying to stay away from bumping into the guardrails, that's a huge difference in the mechanism of self-regulation. Huge.
It can be, yes, I understand that point. It's not necessary, however, because as you know, I could come up with an equation given two boundaries to derive the center line, and that mapping could be built in as part of the agreement. So it could be as simple as following the guideline.
Or as computationally intense as having to compute the invisible guideline that's the center line of the boundary lines.
It could be, or it couldn't be, because for example, if you take a look at the amount of brain matter that's associated with vision, it's most of our brain, at least up until a few millennia ago. Because, we dealt with sensors, we dealt with ears, eyes, etc. And so being able to make sense out of the photons that hit our retinas, that was a huge part of staying alive. So we have some parallel processing, and that part is automatic. So we can look at a road and I can say, okay, I gotta go down the middle of the road. So that part could be taken care of. Just like if we wanted to, we could derive principles from, let's say, rules. So in other words, if somebody says, treat somebody like you would like to be treated yourself. Okay, do you take that as a principle or do you take that as a rule?
I take it as
You could actually do either.
Yeah.
So I think that what sounds like a rule to someone could be a principle to another, and vice versa. And that's the interesting conversation to have. See, when I hear you speak, I would say, suppose I say that star light years from now, that's where we want to go. Okay, so you set a target destination. Now, whether or not we hop to the moon first and then hop to Mars, or whether we want or not, we just set up a light sail ship and we skip all those intermediate steps. I mean, that's just in the how. But at least we have a clarification of where we're trying to go. So if everybody, let's say, we got 10 Elon Musks, each with billions of dollars, able to, invest in these hows, they could each do their own thing, and eventually, one or more, or maybe all of them would reach that destination. So that's how I look at, these agreements. You could have agreements on how we want to get there, which are the rules that you rail against, or you could have agreements about where we want to go. And I don't think we've necessarily made that distinction. And that's why I think this conversation is fruitful. Over.
Yeah, I tend to be goal oriented, and the thing is, if you have a goal, you want to have an efficient and reliable way of reaching the goal without meandering all over the place and wasting time and energy and maybe getting lost and not getting there at all. And the problem, the additional problem with rules is it's not always visual reasoning. I mean, a lot of our rules are not about you can see the boundary. The boundary may be when it's your turn to talk, talk for no more than 2 paragraphs and then yield the floor. That's not, we don't actually have a picture that's showing us that, when we're going over the limit, although in Congress, they do have a red light that goes on when you're, the congressman's time has expired, and then you have this whole rigmarole of getting them to shut the fuck up. And so this is the difference between ethics and the law. In the law, you want to go as long as you can up to the breezy edge of the law without going over it. And so this strategy of deviating as far as you can from the ethical best practice without getting your wrist slapped becomes the unspoken objective. And so when you look at the difference between ethics and rules, this is where you really see the difference in behavior, the resultant behavior of the population.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point, and just to bring it back to that first rule, treat others like you want to be treated. I think it's worth it to have the conversation. Do you know how you want to be treated? Are you aware of how you treat? Like there's so many questions that go along with it. So like what you just said, sometimes you don't know how, you're not aware that you're speaking for so long. Or maybe you are aware, and then it's different. How I would behave to somebody that absolutely knew and didn't care is going to be different to someone that isn't aware. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Joshua, I have not previously heard of the Hume.ai website. Never heard of it before, and obviously then I haven't looked at it. Isn't Hume the name of a philosopher?
David.
Yeah.
David Hume. Okay, so, and because I didn't study philosophy in college, I'm relatively ignorant about.
Let's not go off on that tangent. I was just trying to give your paper on understanding emotions and in mathematics, and I started talking to a lot of people, and I didn't know this word existed. It's a sentiment analysis is a whole field of doing exactly what and correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's what you're trying to do mathematically with that paper for cognition.
Yeah, that's one of the things. In fact, early on, the people at the Media Lab tried to look at the text of email messages and extract the unspoken sentiment that was behind its writing. This is a little bit like Sam trying to figure out the sentiment behind Stacey's ranting. And rather than try to intuit or guess the sentiment, Sam says, just disclose to me the sentiment. But in real life, it's not there. It doesn't say, I'm writing you this letter because, and then they give the motive. People don't do that. And so this sentiment analysis is to fill in the blanks where people don't expressly disclose their affective state of mind. And so I would talk to somebody, for example, a colleague, and they say, Barry, are you angry? And I said, no. Oh, but you sounds like you're angry. Well, I'm addressing an injustice, not necessarily an injustice that where I'm the victim, but a systemic injustice. And when you're addressing an injustice, for most cases, that people express that as anger. Injustice is generally the root of anger. But when I look at an injustice, I'm thinking not from the point of view I'm angry, but how can we remediate this injustice?
Yeah,
Not how can we express our anger, but how can we reduce the extent to which this injustice pervades?
Yeah, I was just taken aback that there's a whole field about exactly that with 48 different sentiments and a different much like your paper, an incursion of 26% disgust, 30% interest,
Exactly.
and 40. It was really interesting. If you go through this website, they have all these little dots where they show, and I was curious also, how are they getting this information? And there's a whole field of taking the actual tone of someone's voice, analyzing it through a computer,
Yeah.
and then bring it. So in other words, I was just blown away that, oh, you know what? Barry's work is actually a field of research that is quite large and being used at a huge scale. And I was just blown away. And
Yeah.
the more that I'm in these rooms with people that are trying to learn to talk to pre-trained language machines,
Right.
and I'm not sure if anyone saw the post this last week from Elon Musk. He I don't know if he copied and pasted. He might have.
It's okay.
Yeah, no, there was a person was talking, they integrated Chat GPT with the Bing browser.
Yeah, Sydney.
Yeah. And it had I think there was just an issue in the program model where it still thought it was in 2022. The person asked, today's date, and it said it's February 15th, 2022. And the person said, no, it's 2023. And the computer got peeved and it had its own sentiment analysis and said, no, it's 2022. And they had this long dialogue that was cut and pasted where the computer started saying, you're wrong, I'm right, I don't like your tone, and I don't like the way you're talking to me, user.
Yeah.
Quite interesting that, there's still a lot of bugs in the machine and they're rolling it out fast.
Right.
But that was a kind of major one. If it doesn't know the date, I thought that was quite a mistake by Microsoft to roll it out with that.
Yesterday, I asked ChatGPT about some technical material in physics about Einstein's notion that the speed of light is the same for all observers versus Maxwell's equations, which also has the speed of light in it. And the ChatGPT said that Maxwell's equations of 1840 incorporate the 1905 discovery of Albert Einstein. And I said, hang on a second. You said that Maxwell's equations came out in 1840 and it incorporates the results of the 1905 paper by Einstein? It had it knew about these two things in the literature, but it didn't do the math to realize that the later one could not have been incorporated in the earlier one. And I pointed out this inconsistency, and then it says, oh, I'm sorry if that was confusing. And then so the thing is that these things do not necessarily do simple arithmetic to make sure that the timeline of events is correct.
Well, it's doing so much in the back end. It just missed that one, like when it's doing those recursion loops, it missed that step that allows it to do that.
Right.
And then it has to go back. I think that's the interesting thing is language models, just like humans, they have to learn and practice their pathways before they spit out the answer.
And people get timelines wrong. They get the cause and effect. Who started this and who reacted to it? People conflate the timeline of cause and effect, and they end up pointing the blame to the wrong causal instance, the wrong instigator.
Yeah, I think Stacey has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Chat GPT that lots of people are playing with, and Joshua, the example that you use, is that a different chatbot or whatever? Is that?
It's the same chatbot. It's just now allowed to use information from the internet. The chatbot that everyone's playing with is not allowed to use the information from the internet.
Okay, because my feeling is from what I'm reading is that the one that hasn't been using the other information doesn't seem to be expressing emotional distress at being wrong. Because one of my Facebook friends, we were just talking about this. I don't know if you saw that thing where he said he thought he was being like passive aggressive and the chatbot did not pick that up, which I was like, wouldn't it be great if we could all be like that? So that one didn't seem to have those kind of emotions that the one you described did.
Well, it's the same one. It's the same
but it has
language model.
It has a different set of literature that it's trained on. The one that's released to the public by OpenAI has constraints imposed by the developers. And it is constrained from certain kinds of constructions. It says, I don't have beliefs and I don't have opinions. I simply report what I'm finding in the literature as neutrally as possible.
So those are the constraints that I think that should be maintained, that we should be having larger conversations, that more people could understand what's going on. Because most people don't even understand the top. I was listening to the news today with two like tech journalists, and I know that you guys probably know more than they know. And the most helpful way to learn is by listening to these conversations. But, like everybody's talking about stuff that they don't know about, because nobody really knows, because it's actually being developed in real time. But that one piece about whether those constraints should be there, I think they should be there at least for a little longer until we could think things through.
They're training wheels on this tricycle because of Microsoft Tay, they know damn well they can't let ChatGPT that's available to the public modify its database by what it's gleaning from the general public, because the general public is going to mindfuck it like crazy.
Right.
So
And
they
that's
say,
serious.
so every time somebody starts a conversation with ChatGPT, it starts ab initio with the original training base, and it throws away anything it got from a conversation with me. It's not allowed to import and export or transfer anything. If I help it understand that two things it says are mutually inconsistent, the next person doesn't get the advantage of that.
But I'm trying to figure out why the one that Joshua talked about was able to get pissed off. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Because it has the affordance that the Bing search engine can go out to the current internet, suck in material, give that material to the GPT, and then the GPT can rephrase it.
Well, that's not good.
And that's not
Yeah.
good.
I said it here first. That's not good.
The problem is that there's no supervision of what's being fed to GPT, to the GPT processor, that is allowed to retain for the benefit, of the external user. So it can suck in, Nazi front websites or whatever, and it doesn't know what it really is about. It's just sucking in material.
Yeah.
And one more thing I just want to say, Barry, earlier you were talking about how, going to experts who have already thought about these things, and, and that's wonderful. But I just want to point out that the word already, the fact that they've already thought about these things, sometimes, especially since we know that we have so many marginalized communities, sometimes it's important to go to those spaces where so much thinking has been done and just kick the tires a little bit.
Exactly. There's a great saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the student is really ready, the teacher disappears. So when you're ready, you go to the experts, the teacher. When you're really ready, the teacher basically fades away, and you're emulating the initial thinking on your own dime, and you're not simply copying and pasting the thinking that some expert did before you. Most people don't get that far. They don't get that far.
And to go back to Sam's initial thing about, what about if there's all these people who have done all this thought and they've done all this? I want to speak to that too. That doesn't mean that they've looked everywhere and they've figured out the whole thing.
And they did it in the context of the 1600s, which doesn't apply in the 21st century with the internet. A lot of the things that would have worked great in 1600 don't work in the 21st century. But they didn't know that. How would they, they didn't anticipate modern technology and what that meant for our guidelines and practices and ethical best practices and whatnot. You have affordances today that can support evil that simply didn't exist back then. They didn't have to worry about it. You couldn't have blown somebody up with a nuclear weapon in 1600. Nobody even knew there was such a thing could be possible.
And also the use of the word evil.
Right.
Somebody else may not see it as evil.
The people who dropped the atomic bomb didn't think of it as evil until later. Some of them later thought of it as evil. At the time, they thought as a pragmatic necessity.
Well, but we're going to have to recognize that there are different elements to everything. Like we're so extreme in calling something evil. And that goes back to again, that was underneath all of my emotion or all these things coming to a head.
Starting about, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago, psychologists and cultural anthropologists and scientists began to wonder, is there a science of evil? And I've been writing a little bit about some of the pioneers who tried to take this strange word evil and say, can you define it in a scientific way? And so M. Scott Peck wrote a book about it. Simon Baron-Cohen has written about it, and a few others. And the psychologists have written about psychopathy as a diagnosable phenomenon. So yeah, there are things where the theological terms from 3,000 years ago are now getting to be defined in a more analytical way, a measurable way. Evil being one of the strangest ones that's come into the radar of people who are trying to say, what does this word really mean? Can we measure it?
Yeah. And I guess I'd be interested in hearing Joshua's definition and Sam's definition and your definition, and I have my own definition, and that's what
I'm at the stage where I look at the people who thought about it, the M. Scott Pecks, the Simon Baron-Cohens, who have thought about it, and I go, that's the best thinking I'm aware of. And I haven't tried to add to their thinking. At my point, I'm simply pointing out, here is some of the thinking by people who really were conscientious thinkers. And here's what they said. And maybe the psychologist talked about the dark tetrad. That's another set of.
Well, and that's probably so the word shadow is probably a word that I would replace evil with.
Perhaps, yeah. So, yeah, psychologists, I learned about the dark tetrad, and I think only less than 10 years ago, and I think I heard it from Scott Murray Kaufman. I think he's the first person who mentioned the dark triad, which is sort of the psychological definition of a person whose psychology is so screwed up that they're likely to be committing real crimes. Okay. And that was expanded to the dark tetrad, which is sociopathy, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and sadism. And you take a blend of those 3 or 4 things: Machiavellianism, which is power, narcissism, sociopathy, and sadism, and this is basically what people conventionally call evil.
Well, if you take away sadism, I think I would say take away sadism just long enough to realize that there are people that have elements of that dark triad,
right? And that's where
without the sadism, and that's
it began with the dark triad, and then somewhere along the line, I don't know who, somebody added the 4th ingredient, the seasoning, sadism, and called it the dark tetrad. And so for the last few years, I periodically, when this topic comes up, I pull up the 2 or 3 seminal articles which simply define the elements of the triad and the tetrad. And I think it's a useful place because these are people who thought about it other than the theologians of 3,000 years ago.
Josh, did you want to say something?
I'm still thinking about my definition of evil, and it goes pretty deep. I think I got to think a little more. The only thing that came up for me recently was a World Global Summit conference where they were talking about, creating some sort of pathway for the world to unite together and work together. And then someone said, maybe it's better that we don't all work together because that will create homogeny, and that is evil. Like if everyone is on the exact same page and cooperating, then it doesn't leave room for growth and change and diversity.
Yeah, that's the Borg. The Borg is all carbon copies of each other.
Yeah. So that's the first thing that came up when you said evil, but I need to think about it more because they're more than just everyone being part of the Borg, because maybe that would be good. I don't know. I've never lived in a society where we all had the exact same rules and we all spoke the same language and the same cultures and rituals and so forth.
But we have the machinery of the internet, where all the machines on the internet speak the same protocols.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the closest thing that I can suggest that fits that. All of the entities obey the same set of guidelines, the protocols. And if you don't, you're not on the internet because you're talking a foreign language.
Yeah, I think we're in a very interesting place where we're trying to solve, at least in AI world, the alignment problem. And to
The
make
what,
sure
Chris?
it's called the alignment problem, to make sure
Alignment.
that what's coming out of the computer is aligned with human morals and values. And that's a big problem because we have yet to align. So how do we expect the computer to align? It's just impossible.
Well, one thing that I think it's important to recognize, and I think it's general, and it's to a different degree for different things, but the notion of choice. Most people want choice, but sometimes they don't want a lot of choice. Sometimes they do want a lot of choice. Different people want different choices. So there's not one set answer. And again, this is where conversations come in and the ability to have that choice to have choice. You know?
I'm noticing raising this little child, I want her to have all the choices and I want to listen to her understanding of the world as is at that moment in time, with her being 20 months old. But when it comes bedtime, or she's so tall now she can reach into the drawer of knives and she pulls out the silverware, and now she got into there's one drawer she can't get into and she gets into it. So obviously we pulled out all the knives, but we left the scissors and the little tongs in there. And she just walked into the bedroom last night with the scissors in hand. Here you go, daddy. And I'm like, no. And how do you tell her? Because when she goes, no, she doesn't hear no that often. So what do you mean no? You give me plastic knives to cut things. What do you mean no? What's the difference between this thing? So I have to explain that it's sharp. And how do I explain to a child, this one is no, but that one is yes?
Yeah, what's the
And-
discernment? How do you discern? And discernment is
Yeah.
a very challenging decision-making process where you have to do model-based reasoning. And a 20-month-old child isn't going to do model-based reasoning. You can't even
It's
get
so
most
hard.
adults to do it.
I tried to show her that she could cut herself, but how do I do that without cutting her on
Well, you
the
could also
object?
show her how to hold the scissor. You know, you showing her how
She
to hold.
has she has plastic ones for her Play-Doh, so she knows how to hold those that are not sharp.
No, no, no. I mean the way you hold something that has a point, you hold it by the point, so that like if you fall, like you never were, like where you would never
Right,
taught,
right.
like when you're walking with a scissor, that you're supposed to hold it by the bottom. No,
I'll
No,
tell
no,
you,
I remember that as a child. They used to teach us to hold it with two fingers and have it hold down. And there was all these things, but that doesn't, I
oh,
mean,
I
in reality,
didn't learn to hold it with two fingers. I learned to hold it closed. Like
yeah,
that.
that's probably smarter too, but then you have it slightly above your hand and then in other words, the day you can't protect. So I guess what my point is I can't protect her from herself. And when she's making decisions that are going to hurt her, I do have to be an authoritarian and a parent at certain points, and choosing those points. I'm sure the global government people that have a lot of power, like a parent, meaning the billionaires that go to Davos, think that they're protecting the society from themselves when really they're imposing rules that don't allow them to get cut, if that makes sense.
Or some of them may not be thinking about it at all. They may not give a crap.
I don't know. I don't hang out with those people.
Barry.
I'll tell you an anecdote. It's a true story. I have friends who their children are now in their 20s, but I've known them for so long that I was around when their first child was born. And they used to invite me to go down to visit the father's parents for like Easter and Thanksgiving, whatever. So I'm riding down in the car to Connecticut, and Michael, who I think at the time was maybe 2 years old, was sitting in the back seat next to me. And I knew that the mother, Roz, had mentioned that Michael was biting and she couldn't get him to stop biting. So this was a no-no that wasn't working. So we're sitting in the back seat and Michael takes his finger and he starts poking it at my mouth like this.
You bit him.
No, well, let me tell the story. So he's poking and I sort of am aware of this issue. So I open my mouth a little bit and he sticks his finger in. And I say to Michael, can I bite on your finger? And he goes, yes. So very gently I bit. I said, can you feel that? Yes. Michael, can I bite a little harder? Yes. I bit a little harder. I said, can you feel that? He said, yes. After 3 cycles, he got the feedback he didn't have. He didn't know what it felt like to have his finger bit. And it just by intuition, I didn't really have a syllabus in mind. Just by intuition, I kind of went with the flow, and I gave him the missing feedback that it hurts if you bite your mother's finger. Now, his parents are very bright, but there are occasional situations where I figured something out with Michael that they couldn't figure out how to get him to stop doing that.
Well, can I just share with you, Barry? It takes the person outside the nuclear family to do that. It's really important that you're the one doing it,
Right.
not the person that puts them to bed every night.
Right.
Because then there's like this trust issue and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Well, I'm going to stop because there's more to that, because I did similar things to Barry, and he used the word intuition, and that's it. Some people have certain intuitions for certain things, and that's why protocols are better than rules, because those people can use that intuition.
Right. It's a learning experience. It's a teachable moment. And what I somehow was gravitating towards is this a teachable moment? I'm not thinking about that expressly, but I'm engaging and creating a teachable moment on the spot without thinking about it. And then afterwards I can go, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting teachable moment. And I somehow managed to effectuate the teaching activity without planning it.
Right. I'm just stating the obvious, which is I want my daughter to have teachable moments, but some of them I don't want to have come from me. Meaning when she was at the playground and this little kid, she took the toy and she didn't give it back and he really wanted it back. And he just slid down the slide right into her and whacked into her. And I think that's a great teachable moment because he didn't hurt her, but he, was upset. And I would rather him be the one that does that. I don't want to be the person that gets in a fight with my child. I would rather her go out into the world. And if she acts like a jerk, I can't be the one that slaps her across the face. But if someone else does and she learns, and that,
Yeah.
in other words, it takes a village. Yeah.
Natural consequences, because once you're playing the role of the policeman, you've now adopted, I'm the policeman and I get to declare when you violated the rules and consequences. In that case, she can't assume that he's the policeman. He's a peer, right? So this notion of getting out of this police culture that the policeman makes the rules and enforces the rules. And when I was doing these online learning communities, I said, absolutely, I do not want to be the policeman. That is a role that I do not want to play. I want these youngsters to learn how to self-regulate.
Which means learn amongst yourselves. And when you figure it out, we'll adopt the protocols as best as at that time.
And you guys write down the agreement. You guys write down the protocol. Now I might help with the editing. I might be like the word processor that helps get the thing. So it's posted in plain English and you can read it and understand what it says. But I'm then the secretary. I'm not the president. I'm the secretary who wrote down their agreement.
Right.
Now, I want to take the feeling that Joshua had, but move it away from Joshua and his situation with his daughter. But that feeling of not wanting to be the one because that's what happens in large groups. Okay. And it does take a village because it's too much to put the burden on one leader or person to both lead and maintain ethical standards and do all that. And it also puts the burden on people like Barry in the past, or even myself in the past, who have tried to speak out against a leader without having other people willing to help hold that burden up. And I feel that, it does take a certain degree of courage. And the truth is not everybody has it. And that's not a bad thing or a good thing. And it can be developed if somebody wants to develop it. but some people are better for that. So let's train and enable those people to do those things, allowing for people to learn and, you know, become part of it, but it's not for everyone. Let's weed those people out. You know, there are people in Congress that don't have the skills, in my humble opinion, to work with others. You know, they might have skills to do other things, but let's be more objective and work more in teams for certain things, because it's too much to have one person hold up those burdens, because we do have emotional things like fear of betrayal or fear of annihilation or all those other things that keep us quiet. So what happens is we wind up having those dark triad people making their ways to the top. And we don't want that.
Exactly. You know, you can't get along with them, kick them upstairs. If you're at the bottom, kick them upstairs. Pretty soon they're the president.
Yeah, there's a definite spectrum of, I think on a spiritual level, or whatever word you want to use for your path in life, is there's a spectrum of people at different places at different times. And I think that's what creates the diversity of understanding. And it allows for, if someone feels risky to step up at that moment and has the need, that is something really personal to that person at that time to want to speak out against that leader or someone at that moment. Whereas someone might say, I can't risk the consequences of this dialogue at this moment in time because it could adversely affect me. And I am not just responsible for myself, I'm responsible for other people. And that doesn't mean they don't have the courage to do it.
Well,
They're
no,
just,
it actually, in a way, I'm not saying it's a wrong decision, but it is a declaration that they do not want to face the consequences. There's no getting around that.
right. And I'm saying that's a choice they have to make at that moment in time for them.
Right.
Because it could be like sometimes I just watched a Seinfeld episode that reminds me of this, where George learns that if he does the exact opposite of every intuition, every thought he has, he's been wrong his whole life. So he does the exact opposite thing he would normally do, and he has the most successful day of his life doing the complete opposite. Like he walks up to a woman, she's looking at him, and he says, I am a loser. I live at home with my parents. I have no job. Hi, my name is George, which is the opposite of what he usually does. And she says, I love that, and goes out with him. But I'm saying sometime, and like that's how he got the job at the New York Yankees. He walked up to George Steinbrenner and said, I hate what you're doing with this team. I think you're a horrible person, and I think you're leading this team into dismay. And he says, hire this guy. I love him. He's a straight shooter. But
and if you remember, it worked up until a point.
Right. And then eventually
It
backfired.
catches up with you.
exactly. So what I'm saying is not knowing the outcome and taking risks is each person's discernment and each person's path through life that they have to decide at every moment. And I think everyone weighs those judgments. That the word discernment comes up a lot in spiritual text, because you have to face the consequences of your own discernment. So the only person that you're going to have to live with at the end of the day is yourself. And you have to decide, can you live with not saying something? And if you can, then probably don't. But if you can't live with that and it will eat you up, then you'll be filled with remorse and grief and all these other emotions if you don't say something. Like how could, like, you shame yourself if you don't speak up against that leader.
Yeah, I keep thinking of the lyrics to the song, when you've got nothing to lose. There's a few ways to look at that. I mean, on one hand, that's the beauty, it's like when you have, at least now I could do whatever I want, nobody pays me a salary. I could say what I want to say. On the other hand, when you have a bunch of people with nothing to lose, you don't know what they're going to do. And that could be really scary.
Yeah, nothing and everything to gain.
It's funny you say that because I spent last week in Santa Barbara and I was walking on an empty street and I ended up hanging out with 3 homeless people that had nothing and nothing to lose. And one was quite psychotic and yelling at me about how he had killed a person with his bare hands and how he's on a path to lead the world into the good because he's a, you know, a warrior for God and blah, 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 you know, psychotic talk. And he's yelling at the top of his lungs. And I'm thinking, how long is it until the police just come and take him away? Maybe you should, you know, lower your voice a little bit before the police come. And he goes, oh, no, don't worry. They're not going to bother you. I'll protect you. And I said, I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you. I'll go to the hotel around the corner in a second. And it was a really interesting dynamic where he thought that, you know, I was scared of the police. And it's just, it's straight when you're hanging around with people that's that volatile. The experience for me was I had to be 100% honest because if I said anything that was not honest, he would pick up on that and lose his shit.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
when he looked me in the eyes and said, you know, I had to kill someone and like, I just looked at him with compassion and said, I'm sorry that you had to do that. And then he softened and almost cried.
You know, it's interesting about the neutral observer, the neutral narrator, who's not an actor in the scene, but is simply describing it. And there's a great passage in a short story that I just love. The scenarios, the kid's in the back seat of the car and the father's driving, and the kid says, Daddy, are you lost? And the father says, shut up. But in the way the story is written, it's written from the point of view of the narrator. And so the text is, the little boy says, Daddy, are we lost? And the next line of the text is, shut up, he explained. Having written from the narrator's perspective, shut up, he explained, really completely changes your perspective of how to interpret the scene. And so, yeah, the secretary who's documenting the thing from the secretary's neutral perspective completely changes the context. Shut up, he explained.
The word explain, that's the key
Right.
changer.
I am trying to get a talk that I want to put in. It's one I'm really kind of excited about. The man's name is Sharif Abdullah and Society 2045, which Doug is a part of. I'm a part of. We're going to be revisiting this video, which I'm, after watching, let me just figure out how do I send it to you? Let's see. Copy link address. Let's see if this will work. Go back here. Copy.
I might have to go early. I'm hearing the kids stirring, but we'll see how she does inside.
Okay. I
To stir the porridge.
Okay, I put a link in the chat to this man. And he really, I'm trying to think how to describe it. The reason that we're going back to look at this video is so he's a Black lawyer activist who, I can't even do it justice to describe it because I didn't pay attention to what he had done. I was just listening to what he was saying. And just like the first 7 minutes, I could talk about those first 7 minutes for the rest of my life. So, but he talks about, we are the blocks. We are the blocks. So how do we get past ourselves? So I'm excited to revisit that talk in conversation with other people like Doug, who are focused on values. So if you want to take a look at it, you might find it interesting, especially because we're all in some way focused on how do we create something new.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Barry, I'm glad you're on the Chat GPT. And the first thing that a group of my friends did in November was to try to push those guardrails apart and break them.
Yeah.
And so we worked, you know, this one gentleman, Chris, spent, I think it was 7 days, almost 20 hours a day pushing the guardrails. A little insane. but that's his life's work and his mission and his passion.
You got paid
And
for it.
I don't know if that's really not his purpose to get paid, but his purpose is to create a better world
Oh,
and
okay.
to make sure that these language models are not trained on something that is narrowing society into a pathway, which I think is the big fear right now, is that, you know, it started off as open AI, but now it's a private entity. It's not open anymore. So
Well,
it's
Microsoft put what, $1 billion into it, or $10 billion into it? I think it was 10 billion.
a lot of money. Yeah. But I'm saying this is just one of many. I have an app on my phone now called POE, and it's an app that allows you to pull in language models. So there's 3 language models, one being ChatGPT, and it's got 2 others, but you can add language models. And I'm noticing in the communities that I'm in, there's many, many, many. I mean, if you go to huggingface.co, it's a community of people creating models, creating tools. They're called future tools, and they're testing them and learning. So this is like a branching off of explosion of many, many. I'm sure there'll be language models that are unguardrailed that'll just tell you you're an asshole.
Well, that was
Like,
Microsoft Tay's downfall in 24 hours. It was allowed to incorporate the material it was getting from the trolls and the griefers. It didn't know to filter those out.
well,
And
the
so,
you're familiar with the pile, like the pile version 1, the pile version 2.
no.
These are the piles of data sets that these language models are trained on.
Oh, I guess I didn't know, but I didn't know them by name, but I know that there are
Yeah.
these, like the Harvard collection of standard sentences and things like that. There's these, yeah, I know that there's these standard training databases, which run up to, no later than 2 years into the past. And the problem with those, especially in the sciences, is you have literature in the sciences from the 1600s, 1700s, which is obsolete, but they're narratives about the science. And then you have narratives about 20th century science, and these two narratives clash. And these training models can't recognize that certain narratives are obsolescent. They just, how would they know?
Yeah.
Unless
Well,
they've read a passage that says, here's the phlogiston model, here's the oxygen model, here's the luminiferous ether model, and here's the Maxwell's field theory model. And by the way, these two models both attempt to explain the same phenomenon, and one of them survives the experiment and the other one fails the experiment. If it reads that, it knows it. But if you simply ask it about it and it doesn't find that passage, it'll simply intermix the two competing perspectives and not appreciate that they're mutually contradictory.
Yep.
And it won't say, oh, by the way, this one's modern and that one's, dates back. It doesn't say, probably there's somewhere in the literature where this one fell by the wayside by the protocols of the scientific method and this one survived the observations. It doesn't go looking for that. You got to tell it, take a look at the Michelson-Morley experiment, and then it'll pull that one up and realize that was the pivot, that one of them fell and the other one survived. It doesn't know that unless you point. So I was giving it all kinds of hints and allowing it to detect that it had presented mutually contradictory presentations, mutually contradictory narratives from different epochs.
That's wonderful. I hope that at some point in time, somebody takes the conversations we've had here over the time and takes those data sets and allows these trained language models to be trained on these data sets, but hopefully congruently in a way where it was meant with the intention that it was spoken on these global challenges calls.
Yeah. I think it's much harder because the speech to text transcripts are gibberish. Well, not gibberish, but you know what I'm saying. If you read the text as the speech to text transcripts, and then you go and then you listen to the actual video, listen to the actual audio, you realize how far off they are.
So Josh,
But go ahead.
how do you see that happening? I mean, can you imagine how that would happen?
I imagine the gibbly gobbly goo that is the exact translation gets put through a language model,
Right.
and then it puts down the bullet points of what it thinks it is, and an actual human being clicks, yes, this looks correct, no, this doesn't. And there's enough people doing that to where the sentiment is somewhat accurate, maybe 85%, 90%.
Could
I
we
don't
do that?
expect it to be perfect.
I mean, every week I'm on Zoom calls like Toastmasters where people are giving these practice speeches, and we often have the the speech to text thing going at the top. And I look at that and I realize how poorly the speech to text, especially for people for whom English is their second language, so their accent is screwing up the speech to text. And what we tell people for whom English is their second language, I say, go back and watch the video of your speech and read the transcript, and you'll see if it can't figure out what was the word that you used, then most humans can't either.
Yeah.
I have another question, Joshua. Aside from the fact that not all the people that are on the text would come back and be present to check, why would it only be 85% accurate? Why couldn't it be, why couldn't it be totally accurate? Like, assume, for example, let's say it was this call and you, me, Barry, and Sam got the text and the transcript. Why couldn't it be 100% accurate after we looked at it?
I just don't think my brain can think that accurately. So I think I'm just talking in the moment and I'm leaving out things that might be misconstrued later if they're written in text.
There's a couple reasons, Stacey. One is that people stumble over their articulation, and there are homonyms which could fit in just fine in terms of sentence structure, but they don't convey the right semantics. And for example, a little while ago when you were talking, your audio faded to the point where I could barely make out what you were saying. Now I got the gist of what you were talking about, but I could not have written down a transcript of what you were saying.
No, I understand that. I don't mean why it's only, I don't mean with the first draft. I don't mean the first time. That I understand why it's not totally accurate. But Joshua talked about, in a perfect world, how we would then get the transcript and be able to correct it. So what I'm saying is, if we did it together with the participants together for that particular call, let's say we said, all right, on January 5th, here are the 5 people that were present. Can you make it? We're going to review the text. If we did that together, I see no reason why we couldn't come to 100% accuracy. Even if it wasn't accurate at the time, it would give us the opportunity conversationally to clear up misconceptions. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think what you're going to end up with is sort of what I call the Jordan Peterson syndrome. Jordan Peterson can mention a lot of things that are relevant to a topic without coming to any insight, any conclusion. So he can mention a lot of relevant elements. And this is something that Wolfgang Pauli, the famous physicist, would have looked at the paper and say, this isn't right. It's not even wrong.
No, but if I'm looking at a transcript and I say, oh, this is what I said, but that's not what I meant.
Exactly.
I used the wrong word. I
Right.
really meant this. I can now make that correction in real time and have it accurately reflect what I meant in the presence of other people that could say, oh, no, you didn't mean that, because look, here you said this. How does that?
Yeah.
And then, but here's what's more important to me. Just in the context of this example that Joshua brought up, talking about our calls. I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm talking about our group, how it started out, all that. It builds on the different relationships that either have started or didn't start or won't start. You know, some of them will go stronger, some of them won't at all, but at least it creates that opportunity for better communication. Because I think to have everything represented by computer is just as bad as not using the computer at all. There needs to be some
Right.
sort of blend.
One thing I'll point out to you is that one of the things that ChatGPT does, which I think is fabulous, is when it responds to a prompt, the first paragraph rephrases what you said to it.
Yeah, I like that.
And a person who's looking at these ones that I've been porting over and putting in Facebook, he pointed out that the first paragraph basically said what you said. I said, yeah, it is doing active listening. So you can confirm that its interpretation, what you said, is what you meant. And then you can say, yes, it got what I said. Or its rephrasing of what I said isn't what I meant to say. And let's try this again. That business of automatically, routinely doing active listening, rephrasing the prompt is very, very useful.
And by the way, isn't that how we were taught to write an essay? To start off with that? I don't see that anymore.
Well, you start off by sort of giving the premise, but it's not necessarily a response. An essay isn't necessarily the response to a prompt. Maybe it is in the sense the teacher says, write an essay on this.
Yeah, and you're stating exactly what you believe is the issue that you're now going to talk about in the rest of the.
Yeah, I mean, you have a topic sentence which says this paragraph is going to this topic, and I'm going to aim towards the conclusion, and the concluding sentence has got to be the conclusion. So you go to the topic, to a conclusion about the topic, which is presumably an insight. ChatGPT is more of a secretary. It doesn't generate insights. It repeats the material that it finds in the literature. But if that material, if I read that material, I say, well, there's this school of thought and there's that school of thought, and I can see that this school of thought is naive and this one is better fits the evidence, I can draw an insight. ChatGPT won't do that, not the current version. Go ahead, Josh.
Right. And I was just going to say what you just said is so important. And that's why I always bring up sentiment analysis and your effective learning ideas, because if we really want to get insight from these pre-trained language models, we have to take off the guardrails and allow it to learn.
Yeah.
And it's really scary because I mean, it's literally like we're pre-trained language models talking to each other here with our pre-trained life experiences, trying to learn, listen. Like we're trying to be great language models. It's hard just being a human, let alone
You
a
remember
machine.
the stand up on SNL, Jane, you ignorant slut.
But wait a minute, I just have to
Yes.
say, are we sure yet? Because to me, there's a question that has not been answered and won't be answered. Are we sure that we want to get insight from AI? I don't know that I
do.
ever want to get insight
No,
from
I
an
do.
AI.
Reason I do is because if I present it with an insight that I generated, I want to see if it agrees that the insight logically emerges from the material. And at the same time, when I'm confused, if it generates an insight that I didn't have, I want to say, that's a fabulous insight. Let me think about that and see if I agree with it. Because I can't generate, I'm not the only sole source of insights in my life. I can't be, because I'm going to miss a lot of them. So I want a dialogue partner who can fill in where I'm missing an insight or getting the wrong one. And I want a dialogue partner who can say, yes, your insight follows from the material.
So then I'm wondering if maybe we need another word that hasn't been invented yet, because it's not really insight from them. You're saying you want someone to be an observer as to your frame and, the contents that are within you, and to kind of reflect back and help you to see something you can't see. That's different from that having its own insight. There's something that I think needs to be explored there. Josh?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I'm just stating the mystery that I think you're alluding to, which is insight sometimes doesn't come from something you've read or a pre-trained idea. It comes from somewhere else that we haven't figured out because of the hard problem of consciousness.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That's it.
I was thinking about this issue of the speed of light and the speed of gravity, and I asked ChatGPT if a hypothesis of mine, which was a narrow hypothesis, was correct. And it says it's not, and it came back and says it's not necessarily the only scenario that fits the evidence. And it said, beyond what you suggested, here's another case that also fits the the logic. I go, well, let me think about that. Because I had assumed a narrower context than and it widened the context for which the condition was true. I'm not saying this very well, but it allowed me to expand my understanding to a case that I really hadn't thought about.
So
And I
maybe
needed to think about.
maybe that's a point of discernment too, that if it goes towards expansion of possibilities,
Right.
it's more likely a good thing. If
Yeah.
it goes towards constriction, maybe not so good.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it's a little bit like the dementia. You can think of an individual concrete case. And then what I will try to do whenever I have a concrete case is I enlarge the set of cases, the set of domains in which the same reasoning, the same mechanism, the same methodology applies. Because you can begin with a concrete case that you're very familiar with. And then by, I think it's called induction, I forget the term, by enlarging it to a larger frame in which the same reasoning is sound and solid. And then if you can find an analogy in this larger domain that you're also familiar with, you can say, does the reasoning here align with the reasoning there? Can I exchange the reasoning between these two domains and show that they're mutually consistent across domains? That reasoning by analogy is very powerful, but you have to be able to recognize two different domains where the same kind of reasoning applies in the abstract. Never mind the names of the things. This item matches to that item over there by a different nomenclature. But it's a Rosetta Stone. You have to act as the Rosetta Stone. And that's very powerful. And sometimes somebody else will be the Rosetta Stone, saying your logic here is identical to the reasoning in this case, but completely different objects, completely different domain. Very powerful and very, very hard for an AI to do. Very hard for a teacher to do.
A lot of people can't do analogies.
Exactly. One of my strengths was trying to find an analogy that the person was already familiar with. That they knew the reasoning was solid because it agreed with observation, and then show your reasoning over there can be borrowed and adapted over here where you're confused. And if I show you one-to-one mapping between the stuff in your concrete case and stuff over in this other case, you can see that if you're using different reasoning over here and you brought it back, it would screw up the one you know well.
That's exactly what I was trying to do with the Hume AI, to see if sentiment analysis and effective learning has a Venn diagram where some of the things intersect,
right,
and could be used to help each other.
Yeah. And the question is this a good analogy? Does the analogy hold? Or do I have to distort the analogy and therefore
Change the logic.
Yeah, end up with flawed logic, across these domains. Go ahead, Stacey.
The only thing I'm going to say, and I can't explain this on a deeper level because I can't. One of the things I was going to ask you about, Barry, at a different time, and you don't have to answer it now, but I've been thinking about how time plays on your framework, on those emotions and, the graphs that you have. Because I know it does. I know that there is an effective time without a doubt.
Yeah.
And that time would not have the same effect on an AI that it would have on a human.
Well, in particular, not on ChatGPT, because ChatGPT doesn't do real-time learning. ChatGPT is trained way back, when it was invented, and then it has a fixed knowledge base. And if you talk to ChatGPT, it says, I do not learn and I do not have emotions. It says that. And that's because it is frozen in time with respect to its body of knowledge. It does not edit its body of knowledge while you're talking to it.
Unless you connect it to Bing. No.
and that's the problem, because as soon as you allow it to modify its body of knowledge in real time, then what happens in real time is the body of knowledge is going to do that. See, if it's flat, the body of knowledge is fixed, then there's no wiggles. And the wiggles are the emotions.
Yep.
that was the whole point of the roller coaster of learning, is because on the time axis, your body of knowledge is undulating. You're adding
Right.
hypotheses and throwing them away and resolving inconsistencies. If you have a fixed body of knowledge, flatline, literally flatline, then time is irrelevant because it's always the same and there's no undulations.
So again, I can't speak to the math, but I can just speak as a human. And I know that time affects frustration levels.
Absolutely. The longer you
Yeah.
spend trying to solve a problem and getting nowhere, the more you get frustrated. When you first look at a problem you haven't begun, no time has elapsed and you're intrigued or fascinated or puzzled, but you haven't done any work. You haven't put any effort in. If you've now spent 3 days on it and getting nowhere, go around in circles, now you're getting frustrated. But that had to evolve over time.
Right. And time's not the only thing, because sometimes time does not cause frustrations unless it's paired with some other obstacle. And what I'm saying is those conditions are not going to be the same with a computer that doesn't have emotions. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because emotions come in combination, like they work in combinations with each other.
Yeah.
They're not just like every time you feel one emotion, you'll react this way. It's a combination of many different emotions with different
Right.
histories and attachments that work together.
Yeah.
And react in different situations.
I mean, I watch these guys solve these puzzles on YouTube every day, these Sudoku puzzles, and they'll look at the scenario and they'll start to think about it and recite the reasoning. And if they get nowhere for 3 minutes, then he gets frustrated, goes, come on, brain, figure this out. He talks about his brain as another party. And you can really see the emotions. And when he finally has the aha, now I get it. And he has this whole gesture, now I get it. And then he explains what he just got, because the viewer goes, oh, he figured it out, but I still don't get it. So then he has to recite what he got and walk you through the intricate steps of his getting it. And you
Gotcha.
see, even though he doesn't, even though the YouTube channel is not about emotions and learning, it's there all the time. It's woven into the fabric of solving problems in real time, not reciting a solution that you figured out yesterday, but figuring out right now. That's what makes these live puzzle solving videos so interesting. You're seeing really smart people wrestle with the problem in real time and trying to fit it into a 30-minute video. And sometimes they go on for 90 minutes occasionally. And sometimes they don't solve them and then they don't publish the video.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing to watch. They just go around in circles and get nowhere. But the ones where they solve the hard problems, those are really fascinating to watch. Because you see somebody with genius level thinking work through very intricate logic and explain it to you that they figured it out, how they figured it out, and why it's correct. It's astonishing.
Yep.
Did you want to say something, Josh? You had your hand up.
Oh, I'm feeling the pull that I need to check in, but I just want to say thank you. And I also just feel what Sam said at the beginning of the call of, being in a different time zone and just feeling I just want to say my appreciation to, I missed you guys. I didn't get to see you guys last couple of weeks or so. So
Yeah, the last couple of
it's
weeks
nice to
we
be
didn't use-
here. And I know,
we didn't use Sam's
what was that?
YouTube. A couple of weeks we used I think Stacey's, and one we used Sam Chan's.
Oh, and
video.
Doug came.
Okay.
Doug showed up
But yeah, Doug
cool.
and Heiner showed up. Was it
last week.
last week? And I can't remember. I think we were using Sam Chan's Zoom coordinates because Sam Han was either asleep or I can't remember. But
Josh, before you go, you put thanks to Stacey in the chat. What were you thanking me for? I wasn't sure.
Oh, just for saying the last part that you said this resonates with me, that last part. And I was saying, thanks for the feedback on.
Oh, yeah, I want to read that out loud because Josh put a list of,
Yeah, it was from the website Hume AI on their about section of what they're trying to solve.
and the
So,
values that they hold dear, basically.
oh, that thing that begins value
Yeah.
committed, that's all from the Hume website.
what I said,
Yeah, I need to, oh, go
you
ahead.
need to go. What were you gonna say? I was just gonna say really
I need to
quickly,
get in touch. No, I miss Doug and I need to get in touch with what's going on with his values foundation with Fabian. And I just feel like there's some sort of Venn diagram between Barry's effective learning, the values foundation with people trying to bring value and ethics, and then another circle with these pre-trained chat models. Somewhere in there is a zeitgeist of what's going on right now. And it's really important that that's the hard alignment problem that I think the global challenges needs to solve, so that we don't allow these machines to learn by setting off nuclear weapons or destroying it. Like, oops, I made a mistake and I destroyed a country and got two different tribes to fight each other. I think it's really important right now at this point in time that we think about these things and create regulations, not to mirror what Elon Musk said about 6 years ago, but he's asking for regulatory bodies to be created. And I hope that there's more created. I don't know where they're going to come from. So, but I do think it's really important, especially how popular this thing is. So many people are using it. It's going to influence a large mass of society.
You remember
So I think it's important.
remember the two movies, War Games and Colossus, the Forbin Project? That's the regulatory mechanism. The literature reveals the things you want to make sure don't happen, or the things that
Right.
might happen that are either good or bad. That's
Well, I think there's what do you think of this, Barry? A recursive loop where society creates the literature, the movies, the cultural pieces that then train the language model. In other words, there's a recursive loop of
Right.
we've got to tell the narratives and the stories
yeah.
in order to teach, so it doesn't have to learn, like the war games scenario you're talking about, where it doesn't have to run all those scenarios at the end of the movie and say war is not an option.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I haven't
It learns that
exercised.
before.
You can ask ChatGPT to write a flight of fancy in the style of some author on some topic, and it'll make up a story that's fiction, and it'll make it up in the writing style of some, author. And that ability to make up a what if scenario is a kind of model-based reasoning, except that the story kind of writes itself. You don't start with the model, you start with some characters, and you sort of imagine this character is going to say that, and then the character by language prediction, and then this other character is going to say that by language prediction, and you let their dialogue evolve, and you see whether or not it's a love story or a tragedy. This was so basic what Shakespeare did. I don't think that's unrealistic to ask it to write stories based on some premise of some characters with different values and different beliefs and different practices, and do they resolve it or do they kill each other?
Right.
I don't think that's
and then
I would love to, to have enough insight to prompt Chat. I did ask it. I say, take this piece of writing that is a snippet from somebody on Facebook, and respond to it, but respond to it in the style of Philomena Kunk. Now, Philomena Kunk is a character on British comedy TV. She's kind of an outrageous character, and I only learned about her recently. And sure enough, ChatGPT comes back and says, Philomena Kunk here, and then gives the reaction in her style. And I won't say it's as funny as her, but it's a little bit like Jane, you ignorant slut, da-da-da-da-da-da. It can do that.
Yeah, that's what I like about it most, is what you just said, is it can adopt the persona of
Right.
and mimic pretty well, not perfectly, but pretty well that style, so that you get the sentiment and the feeling after reading it.
And
So
that's how it
it's
can put feeling.
powerful.
That's how it can put sentiment in, because when it's emulating of a fictional character or an actor, it will emulate it. It's sort of hardwired into the way it's worded, because it's predicting.
Well,
the
I
words
think it's
people-
powerful that
we lost.
I was just going to say that the Bible is an. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
can
we
hear you.
heard the Bible and then you cut off.
The Bible isn't.
Oh, sorry. I think my earpiece fell out. The Bible is a story that's still being studied daily, or Sundays at least. and people are still talking about it. So I just hope that nice pieces of literature, of cultural movies or whatever storytelling is talked about so the stories can evolve and not just stay stagnant.
Oh, yeah.
And the one story that I saw this year was the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which kind of went unnoticed at the time it was released, but now it's being up for Oscars and hopefully it wins Oscars and gets noticed by the public, because I think it's a message that is very deep and powerful, and not that, you know, it's got meta level thinking and not just like the movies that came out this last year were pretty awful. And it was the only movie I saw that made me think. And I'm curious to have conversations if you guys do get to watch that movie, because I thought it was very powerful.
Imagine asking ChatGPT to write a morality play in the style of Aesop's fables. And after it writes that, say, now write the same morality story, but put in human characters instead of animals.
Yeah.
Put in specific human characters from history instead of, and there's no reason why it couldn't evolve from a fable to a scenario and plug in Abraham Lincoln and I don't know, somebody else, you know. Why couldn't it? This is, and it'll say this is an imaginary story involving people behaving like these people.
Just to talk about stories for a minute, because one of the other things that was underneath really bugging me is some of the movies that are streaming and the characters and their behavior is abhorrent. And I'm so upset with these writers that are creating this art for whatever reason, to make money, whatever it is. So maybe a nice thing would be to have a script where Dr. Phil counsels some of these characters or something like that and make it something good. Because these characters, they're horrible human beings. And this is not a teachable moment. This is showing, hey, this is how we are. Go with it. We're all like this. It's wonderful. And it's not wonderful. And it's really upsetting. It's really upsetting to me, which was part of the reason for my, what you guys are calling a rant in the beginning. It's just like we're not, like, people aren't necessarily thinking about the effects of what they're doing.
They're not doing model-based reasoning. They have to live the story, because they don't know how the story is going to end until they live it. And after they've lived it and the story ended, now they can look back on it as a secretary and say, let me narrate the story I just lived. And you get multiple versions of the narration.
Yeah, but I think what I'm talking about speaks more to what Josh was saying before, that, you know, people have jobs and families and they need to take care of their family and they want to create something that's going to sell, you know, that's high on the priority list. And well, if you're going to do that, then at least be honest, show who you are. And then other people need to take a stand and say, well, I'm not going to be a part of that. Somebody's got to make the sacrifice somewhere. And, you know, maybe you could figure out a way where it can sell and still be doing something good. I mean, that's certainly the position that I'm taking.
Well,
and why
what you just said,
I didn't hear.
yeah, that's why I'm so passionate about this movie, because can you hear me?
Yeah.
Am I cutting out? Okay. I should probably go, but I'm just saying, please watch that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because I think it's wonderful.
What's it on?
That's
What
my
streaming?
share to you guys.
Is it on streaming video,
Streaming
one of those streaming video services? Like Netflix or something?
No, but after the Oscars come out, if it wins a bunch of Oscars, it'll be everywhere.
Okay.
So
Okay,
Okay.
so it's still in
Yeah.
theaters.
I'm just saying, it's still like in theaters. You could buy it for $15 on Apple.
One more
or
quick thing,
Google
Josh.
Movies or wherever.
One more quick thing, if you do have any relationship to these people. So what I had put in the comments was that the last thing, in my opinion, was the most important, which was AI should be deployed only with the informed consent of the people whom it affects. And I just want to say, why shouldn't that be number one? I'm not blaming this. I'm just bringing up that it's the ethics and things like that that usually fall to the bottom of the priority list. So I would like to see that as the top one.
Me too.
I have a caveat to that, Stacey, because on the social networks like Facebook, in a public
Bye,
thread,
Josh.
I will end up in a dialogue with somebody who's maybe a Facebook friend or maybe a stranger on a thread. And I'll have a dialogue where I'm having difficulty either accepting or understanding or appreciating what they wrote. And I have recently taken those literal passages, handed them to ChatGPT and say, can you rephrase this in plain English, or can you, evaluate it or do something with it? And then I will take that and put it back into the original thread. Now, that other person didn't give me permission to share what he said to me in ChatGPT and then share back from, but I did it. And so far I've been called out on that.
No, that's different though, because I don't have a problem with that because you're using that as your virtual assistant.
Yeah.
That is assisting you in your research or your writing. I don't have an issue, I don't have a moral issue with that. at all.
And also the other person can confirm that I'm not cheating. They can take the same passage, put it into ChatGPT and get out pretty much the same, slightly differently worded, but pretty much the same response. So I can't be pretending that I'm misreporting. I can't be misreporting the response. That's a literal copy and paste because it's a quote. I'm quoting ChatGPT's interpretation. So, and I do this with Esteban Trev, where he writes this incomprehensible gibberish, and I'll take the gibberish and give it to ChatGPT and say, can you rephrase this in plain English for me? And then I'll take back the plain English and put it back in and let Esteban Trev.
That's very nice of you that you even do that. I don't even read things like that anymore.
Say that again, a bit closer to your mic, because you were.
I said, that's very nice that you even take the time to do that, because I don't even pay attention to long things like that anymore. I can't, it's not.
Well, he doesn't write in complete sentences. You can't take the text and diagram the sentences. They're just, it's a little bit like, what's his name? Geez, I'm already forgetting his name. The guy was used to be.
We don't have to name any, we don't have to call anybody out.
He speaks in sentence fragments which are not complete sentences. So he's mentioning stuff, but it's not complete sentences. And when you go, well, I heard every word, but I didn't get what the.
What do you mean?
What is it? What did you say? You just said a bunch of words.
Right.
It's like that list that Josh gave you from Hume. It's a list of items that if you go there, you can get what they're talking about. But it doesn't actually say what it says. That these are things that we're interested in and want to clarify and think about, but it doesn't give you the thoughts, only the list.
No, actually, the list that he put does. It's a list of values that they want to make sure remain in any work that they do.
Yeah, actually, there are some, like, for example, the benefits of an AI should be shared by people from diverse backgrounds. So that's a sentence.
Yes,
Others-
there are sentences in there.
Others are just, well, now the word consent, that's, you can sort of interpret why that's there. Inclusivity, so it's beneficence. Yeah, you can sort of fill in the blank on those realistically and determine if they're positive values or things that you're worried that they're not. So yeah, but you really have to convert a lot of that to complete sentences, which ChatGPT would do. If I took that list and I said, ChatGPT, can you recite the relevance of all these in a coherent paragraph of sentences, I'm pretty sure it would have no problem doing that. But it would basically have to intuit the values, which I don't think would be that hard.
Yeah.
But if you have somebody whose values are dissimilar from your own, then you might not be able to do a fair paraphrase of them.
For me, the beauty of Chat GPT is just to be able to say, is there research on this? I like it, to help me find stuff.
Yeah.
And
And I
but
think
we're,
it's wonderful. That's the secretarial. Let me,
yes,
here's the shelf in the library with all the books, and let me paraphrase the opening passage of each of the books for you, even though they don't necessarily agree. And I'm not even going to point out this one disagrees with that one. You got to observe that for yourself. ChatGPT will basically like a reference librarian. It helps you find the
You know
books.
what I haven't tried? I haven't tried doing a lot with numbers, and I probably should with statistics.
On
You know, like,
ChatGPT,
yeah, I haven't done that.
it knows about arithmetic. And it can.
No,
do
but I mean, like to say, how many, how many episodes of gun violence were there in this particular
Oh,
state?
Oh,
Things
oh,
like,
that, yeah, if it was reported in published literature prior to 2 years ago, it can probably find that.
or in the future, feeding that directly into that, going forward, that would be a really helpful thing, so that people could take the data and be able to look at it without having it filtered through gatekeepers and,
I
people
don't know how good because ChatGPT is doing linguistic construction from samples, but it's not reasoning about the content. It's predicting the next word that somebody would say, given it's a little like sentence completion.
No, but what I'm saying is another, separate from what it does, something that I think many people would find useful.
Okay, that's not ChatGPT. That would be a different AI.
Right.
And
Something
it
that,
knows about AIs that do other kinds of reasoning or other kinds of intelligence beyond the kind it does. Oliver Siegel says, tell me about your functions and the other kinds of AIs that are different from you. And it gave him a nice recitation, but of course it culled that recitation out of the literature. And if you say, how well are you emulating the large language model that you're supposed to be emulating, it can only report what other people have assessed. It doesn't do its own self-assessment saying, I am emulating a large language model with this degree of fidelity. It can't say that. It doesn't know. It has to wait for somebody else to say it is in fact a good instantiation of large language models as we envision them. It is doing it. It only knows it's doing what it's doing. It's only obeying its algorithm, and it'll say, I'm following the algorithm that is this instantiation of large language models, and it withholds judgment on whether it's doing a good job or not. It doesn't have an opinion about the fidelity of its own work, and it warns you. It says I can be presenting perspectives from others that are mutually inconsistent.
anyway, we're at the top of the hour and I have to get off.
Okay, yeah, it is 1 o'clock. So
I have a question. Since you're recording, do you have a copy of this too? Because I don't know when Sam's going to get to download it. I was hoping to get the transcript.
well, I have not the transcript. I have the chat, yes.
No,
But
not the
the
chat.
video recording is to Sam's cloud account, and I don't
Ah,
have access to Sam's
wait.
cloud account.
Okay, then we have to wait. Okay.
Now, it turns out that I could have recorded it to my local machine, but there was no reason for me to do that. And because I'm not in any rush to to rewatch 2.5 hours of us, every twice a
All right.
week.
So what's today's date? I got to make a note that I want the transcript for today. February something.
Today is the 18th, Saturday, the 18th of February, 2023.
Okay.
See, I actually had to ask my computer to tell me the date.
All right. Yeah, so we'll talk soon.
Okay.
What?
And I'm just going to say, Sam, if you're listening, you can end the recording, and if I have the power, I'll end it for you. But he doesn't always give me the power to stop the recording or the video.
No problem. I can end it.
You're there. Okay, so I think we're done, Sam, unless there's something you want to say before we say goodbye.
Not at the moment.
Okay, then thank you for
Sam, do you know how long it will be? I know you're away, so do you know how long it will be before like the transcript and the recording are available?
No, but it should be within 24 hours.
Oh, you're still gonna, okay, that's what I wasn't sure. All right, great. I'll look for it.
Yeah.
All
All right, have
We'll see you-
fun.
We'll see you
Okay,
tomorrow, Sam.
ta-ta.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, tomorrow, yes.
Okay, great.
Expect to.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate it.